I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem!
I know a lot of idiots and think a lot of is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is it takes things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you Richard Lewis, who I find to be a very interesting case because he's kind of got the tale of a classic comedian from his era, where I think people my age know him from Curb Your Enthusiasm and not a lot else, but he's had a great long stand-up career, and I think would be a guy like many guys in the 80s. I think this is a case for a lot of people that came up when Richard Lewis was coming up. Their careers would be so much different now because of the internet, whether it's just having social media clips or podcasts or whatever. Those guys struggled for a long time to find an audience because there's really no way to do it. And now I think it's a rare positive that has come out of the internet that a lot of these, more underrated guys are able to find their audience. And, Richard Lewis, obviously a very famous comedian, but I don't know if he ever quite got his due, or he may not have felt that way anyways. So we will get into it. But first, I want to make sure that you guys know to go to blindmike.net, for goodness sake. If you want to support this show, there are a few ways to do it. You can do it for free by going to Apple, Spotify, Google, leaving us nice reviews, 5 stars, all of that, subscribing, and doing the same on YouTube, tapping the notification bell, leaving comments. If you're watching right now on YouTube and you're not subscribed, subscribe because it helps the channel grow. So we appreciate that. And if you want to throw a few shekels behind us, then go to the Patreon, subscribe. We do bonus episodes there every month. Like we did after the Jerky Boys episode, we posted a prank calls episode. And we'll probably do more of those because I think people are sending in more and more prank calls that they think should be used. So we might do a part 2 of that episode. So if you want stuff like that, like the Pelican Brief, like Donald Glover's Weirdo, the Opie and Jim, all kinds of stuff we've done on the Patreon, then make sure you subscribe, and you also get these episodes a week early. All right? And another reason to subscribe is that if you're watching on YouTube, I know I just said subscribe and support the YouTube, but also they make us take a lot of videos out, so you get the full video on YouTube as well. All right, enough of that.
Full video on Patreon.
What's that?
Full video on Patreon.
Yes, yeah, go to the Patreon, folks. Blindmike.net. So Richard Lewis, like I said, Curb helped his career a lot, I think, because without that, I don't know that his name would be as recognizable, even though I think he was a big deal at one time. But I feel like he never quite found the avenue of success he was looking for outside of stand-up. But in Curb, you really get to know his voice and who he is. And he's a guy who's toured all the way up until a few years ago. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode and pay tribute to the great Richard Lewis is because he actually just put out a video a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago at this point, announcing that he has Parkinson's disease. He seemed in fine spirits about it. He seemed like he was dealing with it okay. And he looked in, I wouldn't say good health necessarily, but he is an older man. He seemed well, but I thought it was kind of a sad story. So I wanted to make sure we paid tribute to the man. So let's start. Let's start right at his childhood, because that is probably where he developed a lot of his trademark neuroses.
Where did you come from?
My mother's vagina.
How was that for you?
Horrible.
Yeah? You never got over it, did you?
Well, she wanted to push me back in.
Still?
She's dead. They're all dead. But I mean, they didn't. I was a mistake child.
Me too. Jesus Christ.
I'm not. You know, I have about 8,000 billion pages in my computer of premises. So you're not going to be catching me doing routines. But the truth is, I really was a mistake, baby. There's no way they wanted me.
Yeah.
My siblings were much older, and my father looked like a Jewish, looked like Michelangelo with a fucking beard. I said, wait a minute, what the fuck am I doing here? And then everyone moved out. My brother moved out to, hear Allen Ginsberg stand on a corner and do, Howl, and my sister.
He moved to San Francisco?
No, I think Ginsberg was in New York, but will you do some research before you call me the next time?
Sure.
I thought he had a funny rapport with Maron. And by the way, it's funny because the first thing I saw when I saw that he had siblings 6 and 9 years older than him, I was like, oh, I wonder if he was a mistake. And then that was one of the first things he said on Maron is, I don't think my parents really wanted me. And obviously, I think that's a feeling that a lot of comedians have that turns them into comedians, that in some way either their parents weren't around or they didn't have a good relationship with them. But that also obviously goes a long way into his, maybe bitterness that he has and depression. He talks a lot about mental health and drug use and alcohol abuse and all that kind of stuff that obviously comes from childhood. And his dad was working all the time. And he said basically because his siblings were so much older that he was stuck with his mother and they didn't get along. So he just had this feeling of not being wanted and which developed into a lot of great material, obviously.
Right. It's funny too, because if you do watch Curb and watching these videos and everything, he's not acting very much in that show.
No, not at all. And you know what? I think that's why that's the perfect role for him.
Yeah.
Because I've seen I've seen clips from some of the other sitcoms that he was in and things, and he's acting. It's very clear that he's acting. Whereas in Curb, it's just him.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's the guy you heard on Maron, basically.
Right.
They also talked a lot about in this interview. We got a couple more clips from that WTF episode, and they talk a lot about how Maron brings up that he has heard a lot throughout his career, Richard Lewis comparisons. Oh, you must have been a big Richard Lewis fan, a lot of influence from Richard Lewis. And that never dawned on me until he said it and it clicked in me. I was like, wow, that is a perfect comparison.
1,000%.
He is very Richard Lewis. And if you don't know Richard Lewis's vibe at all, obviously he has similarities to Larry David, but I think he's a much darker guy. Not that his act is dark. It's weird because there's an element of like shtick and borscht belt type of which plays into his like coming up in stand-up, but there is like a kind of a schmaltzy element to some of his stand-up, and yet a lot of it is dealing with depression and womanizing and things like that. So it is kind of interesting. But what's next from this Maron interview?
Getting on stage.
Yeah, so this is just early in his career.
And so what'd you end up doing?
He died very soon after I graduated college, and then that. It was a real shocker, man. So it was it catapulted me on stage because I was writing jokes for all these, these Borscht Belt guys, and
like who?
Well, I guess the most famous was a guy named Morty Gunty. But there was a handful of them.
You wrote one-liners for
all these guys who were doing the Borscht Belt.
So did you go up there to watch your act and everything?
Fucking A.
So you sat up there at the hotels?
Yeah, I wanted to see if they delivered it right.
And did they?
No. And they gave me back everything. 99% they said, this won't work for me. And I realized why. Because it was about me.
Yeah.
Actually, then it suddenly when my father dropped dead.
Yeah.
I realized that there was such a hole to fill in that. It was pretty horrible for everybody in the family. My mother, brother, and sister, and everybody else. So anyway, so the truth of the matter is going on stage did really help fill that hole.
In terms of the grief and everything else?
Totally. That's exactly what I'm talking. It's the first time you actually...
I think a lot of that too is we talked about it with Dennis Miller, where, if you have a unique voice like that and you start writing for other people, it might not even work. Like the material might not work, even if it's good jokes or whatever, because, Dennis Miller's writing for Dennis Miller, or Richard Lewis is obviously writing for Richard Lewis. So if he sends it to, whoever the hell Morty Gunty is, it's not going to come out the same as it would out of Richard Lewis's mouth. And it's weird. I didn't think this, I wouldn't have guessed this before watching Richard Lewis's stand-up. But on stage, he reminded me a lot of Robin Williams, where he's very energetic, and we'll find out maybe what played into him having such energy. But he's very energetic and physical and moving around the stage. And so he reminded me of guys like Robin Williams, Sebastian Maniscalco, which I would never have guessed just from knowing him again from Curb.
Yep. And just so you know, Morty Gunty was an American actor and comedian well known among New York City nightclub comics in the 60s. Well,
I was able to put that together. I'm just not too familiar with his work.
No, me either. I thought it was going to be like some dude who like never left like some town or something. Yeah. He was the star. Like everyone always thinks those. But next we have him talking about addiction.
Yeah. So this, and this I knew from Curb, but I thought it was more alcohol based, which alcohol did play a big part in his addiction. But I didn't realize, how deep his addiction went.
To come back, I lived with this really great woman in the middle ages. I was a really horrible drunk. And I'd come home and after embarrassing her and myself and ruining the night.
Yeah.
And I would look in the mirror and I'd say, Richard, I'd pray to myself.
Yeah.
I go, I'm praying to myself.
Yeah.
How can I pray to me? It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I remember they wanted to take me to rehab, and they did. And so I walk in there with an ex-girlfriend, and who's taking me to a rehab in Hazelton, which I bolted from, and I still had 2 more days.
Isn't that like Minnesota or something?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
To see if I could kill myself 2 more times. And
it's always just booze or blow too?
Well, crystal meth was at the end, a lot of that.
Oh, wow. Man, I can't even imagine you on meth. 3 days into that? Did you, I imagine that.
6 days. I was like Howard Hughes as a rabbi.
So that must have been a lot of notebooks then, huh?
Oh, you should see me trying to stay on a lot of hanging pictures.
So, that shocked me when I heard crystal meth, but it also made the clips I saw of his stand-up make a lot more sense when he's fucking zipping around stage and flailing his arms and everything.
That's probably why Larry didn't like him at first.
Oh, well, that's our next clip, right?
Yes. We did briefly touch on this in the Larry David episode.
Yeah. So I don't have, I just have him kind of briefly giving a summary because we did talk about it in the Larry David episode, but it is a funny story.
You guys go, how far back do you go?
We go back to when we were 12, and I had mentioned this, and I can do it in 20 seconds or less. I went to this sports camp, which was very famous in New York State, and he was there, Larry, a gangly, despicable human being, annoying. I hated him.
You hated him at camp?
Hated him, hatred.
But that's why you remember him.
But he hated me.
But that's interesting. But that's what bonded you.
Well, what happened was, usually when you meet somebody at camp, we say, hey, maybe our parents will drive us into Manhattan. We'll go to Radio City and see Ben-Hur or some shit. We're 12, But he was, as my mother would say, that's Z on my list.
Yeah.
It would make me laugh. Because the last thing I would ever do was see this fucking guy.
Yeah.
He annoyed me that much.
Yeah.
And me, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I became a comic first, and he was a real fan. He liked me, liked me.
Right.
Then he became a comic, and I heard about him. I'm like, whoa, what a fucking brain this guy's got.
Yeah.
So he helped me move out of my college girlfriend's apartment. We were inseparable. Yeah. Every day I saw him. I performed every day, 2 or 3 sets a night.
At Catch in the Improv?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah, and so they spent a lot of time together. But as the story goes, when they met each other in New York, they didn't put together that they went to the same camp when they were kids and knew each other. And then one night they got to talking, and Richard said that he was kind of feeling buzzed, but Larry was completely sober. And they start kind of putting it together. And he's like, wait, you went to this camp? Wait, you're that Larry David? And they came to blows, which is wild to me. I don't know if that's just, it's become folklore or if that really happened, because it is, it's very representative of Larry and Richard's personalities and their relationship.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking back to like when I was 12 years old, and I can feel being like maybe afraid of other kids or nervous around them or not liking them, like finding them annoying or something. But the feeling of hate, I can't channel that at all.
No.
So for two men now in their fucking 60s or 70s to be like, oh, I remember hating this motherfucker.
They must have really said horrible shit to each other, like next level bad.
It had to be, right? Yeah. I wonder who the instigator was. I can't figure out who would be the alpha in that. I feel like Larry, probably. But
yeah, but then you think of Richard and you're like, well, no, it could definitely be him.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to distinguish. And we will obviously we'll get to more of Richard and Larry and their work on Curb, of course, but we got a lot to get to before we get there.
Yeah, this is him talking about From Hell.
Yeah, so I thought it was a joke when I saw this in Curb. I didn't know much of his stand-up at the time. But the phrase from hell, the blank from hell, the mother-in-law from hell or the dinner from hell, whatever, that's Richard Lewis. He's actually credited with that.
Well, I really did popularize that thing.
Of course you did.
I mean, it got to a point where I couldn't say it anymore. Because I felt it was a hook. It was an unintentional hook. Or it was a metaphor for me for being victimized.
Right.
Everything. It was
like I don't get no respect.
Yeah, it was hyperbole.
Right.
But, the truth of the matter is it's in the Yale Book of Quotations, but they still didn't write it properly. It was about me feeling of being a victim of a person, place, or thing. And it was never my fault.
That's one where, like, when you hear street jokes and you're like, well, someone must have come up with that. Like, so someone had to be the first one to tell that joke and write it. It's almost the opposite with From Hell for me, where I just assumed, like, people got there on their own. I didn't realize Richard Lewis had to popularize it for us to be like, oh, this equates to the worst place we could go.
Right.
So we'll always have that. And yeah, of course, the Curb episode is him trying to get into the book of quotes. Larry's trying to get him in the book of quotes, get him credit, and everyone else is taking credit for it.
What a great show.
It really is. Yeah. I apologize for mentioning Larry David so much. This is supposed to be a tribute to Richard Lewis, but it's hard not to.
They're two P's, the two of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But next we have him talking about his first Carson.
So late night was as it was for a lot of guys in the 70s and 80s, but late night was a big factor in his life. Letterman was very good to him, but he struggled with Carson, and he'll explain why.
I'm waiting behind. It's Johnny Carson. I'm 24 years old, and rest his soul, Paul Papard.
Jack Parr?
Papard.
George Papard.
George Papard.
Right, yeah, from the 18.
I'm on like the last 6 minutes of the show. It was on for 90 minutes, and he had lung cancer. So I'm back there crying, and he says, and he's talking about he has very few weeks to live. He has lung cancer. And then Carson says, well, we'll wish you the best. And then he segued, and now, for the first time on national television, I went into the toilet and away. They had to get Jewish plumbers to get me out of the toilet.
So then, that's hilarious, by the way, to have George Papard talking about lung cancer and then bring a comedian on. Well, maybe have a musical act that night, Johnny.
Yeah, it plays like sad music or something.
So he goes on, and I believe this is the same night because his first appearance is like an 8-minute long set, which is a little longer than usual. And they were pretty rigid at the Tonight Show. They were pretty strict in Johnny's day about, being in and out on time and the material that you're doing and all of that. So Richard didn't necessarily obey those rules.
So I was doing this division of motor vehicles routine that I had done for a decade. I couldn't wait to get it on to Carson. And David Brenner once told me, and young comics should know this, he said, you do one Tonight Show, one talk show, any of them,
It's like doing a nightclub in Manhattan 3 times a night to a full house for 100 years. So you better not walk through it.
Yeah,
you better take every 6 minutes seriously. And I always did. I treat every talk show like it's a Super Bowl. So I was doing my monologue, and I was killing him in Burbank, which is normally a pretty square audience. So I see the stage manager go under the camera and go, wrap it up. I go, wait a minute. Wrap it up. If I wrap, and I was thinking in my head, if I wrap it up, I'll never get the show again because I didn't finish half the monologue. And if I stay on, it'll be the longest monologue in history, which it was 11 minutes. Yeah. Okay. And then I said, I'll never get the show again. But if people say, how come you're not on with Johnny? I was too funny. I'd rather say I was too funny. So as I walked back, the segment producer went, you will never get the show again. And I knew, it wasn't my fault, but I knew I did the right thing. Carson saw me be great. So I go to the Palm, where I always used to go after Tonight shows, and there's Carson with his ex-lawyer, Bushkin, or it was Bushkin at the time. Right, yes. And I dart, what a billion to one shot. We still had our makeup on from the show. Yeah. I dart over like Jack Ruby, and, Johnny gets to the ice, and I got on my knees like Al Jolson, and I pled my case, and I told him what I just told you. I didn't want you to think that I didn't know what a monologue is. And I said, I'd rather not do your show and be professional than cut it off in half. So the next day I get a call from the rather nasty-tempered producer, and he went, all right, you're a lucky man. You're back to business with Johnny.
I know we say it all the time, but dealing with Carson, he's a legend, but Jesus Christ, the guy, so temperamental. You gotta walk on eggshells with this fucking guy.
He's God.
But, and that's, again, perfect Richard Lewis, where him being like neurotic and panicking and saying, well, if I don't do this my way, it's not going to be any good. And then freaking out enough that he has to go up to Johnny and like that's the Richard Lewis that I know. That makes a lot of sense to me when I heard that story.
Yes.
Where are we going now?
Him with Costas talking about Letterman.
Oh yeah. So like I said, Carson, and then I think he ended up doing a panel on Carson when he got his TV show. But Letterman, he was on a lot. I know I believe his first appearance was in like 1982 or something like that. And I saw an interview with Richard. He was on Larry King in 88 or 89. And at that time, he said he had been on Letterman like 40 times already.
Jesus.
So he was on Letterman a lot. And he talks about his relationship with Dave.
You were knocking around doing that kind of stuff and doing stand-up, and until Letterman came along and gave you the real forum, zilch.
I did Diary. I was a comic for 8 or 9 years, but no audience. Then Diary was sort of neat. Nothing happened, and then Letterman in 82, and then I killed myself. I worked so hard for that show, and I got an audience finally, and now a couple of in and out primetime things, but now Anything But Love with Jamie Lee, maybe that'll just be it for me, that I can really relax a little bit.
So we'll talk about Anything But Love in a minute also, but I find it interesting because, the comparison is always like Rogan is modern day Carson for comedians in the sense that he's giving, bringing guys on and giving them a giant platform.
Correct.
And, you kind of trust his stamp of approval in some way. But so Carson gets all the credit for that. But Letterman, I almost think is a better comparison just because he would give opportunities to weirder guys.
Right.
Carson would have people on that were already on the path to success in some way, and he would kind of launch them. But Letterman would have these weird guys on, like Chris Elliott was on all the time, and Richard Lewis, and obviously eventually like Norm. So Letterman loved weirdos, which Richard Lewis is much more in that camp than I think a lot of the people that were on Carson more often.
I would love to see Norm interact with Carson.
Well, that was the thing is they told Norm is like, you're more of a Jay comic. Like when Jay is on, we'll have you on. And Norm is kind of like, wait, I don't know. What is he not like funny people? I don't get it. But Letterman's also the guy that told Richard Lewis, he may have, if he did stand up at all on Letterman, it was once. And Letterman told him, like, you should be a panel guest, which is actually, like, that's great for a comic because then they don't have to waste their material on national television and have an opportunity to be more relatable. You're just having a conversation on the couch, even though a lot of it is kind of scripted or pre-interviewed.
Yeah, because comics now can get away with doing material at a show that they did on TV because, you know, like, who knows how many people really watch it? Under 1 million. But like back then, there would be like 80 million people watching.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the opposite of that, though, is that people weren't following comedy as closely. Now, if you're a fan of, you know, pick your comedian today, Tim Dillon, it's like, oh, I saw this stand-up clip, you asshole. You know, people like give him shit for doing material he's already done because they follow him so closely. Whereas back then, even though 30 million people or 20 million people were watching The Tonight Show, that's still not most of the country. So there's a good chance people didn't see it. You know?
Right.
Are we talking about Anything But Love now?
Nope. This is Richard on with I don't know, a Metallica fan looking Howard Stern, like Spike.
Oh, that's right. You know what? I forgot. I forgot that Howard was a big part of Richard's career as well. Like, you know, they did a lot of good promotion for Richard.
Right.
I remember Stuttering John trying to interview Richard Lewis. And Richard was basically like, fuck you, I'll talk to Howard if he wants to talk to me. I'm not going to talk to you. And then the famous, for any of you dabblers out there, the famous story is that Stuttering John, when he wrote for the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar roast, Richard Lewis was in the audience. And John walked up to him after the show and was like, Richard, how did I do? Which is a weird thing to ask someone.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard just goes, this is brilliant, John. It's all brilliant. And John has told everyone since that day over and over again. It's like, Richard Lewis called me brilliant. That's all it took. It wasn't bombarding the guy and making him compliment you.
It wasn't him saying that just to get you the fuck away from him.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
But yeah,
anyways,
Howard's outfit in this is like unbelievable.
Well, so this was, I assumed it was the Channel 9 show, but it was something called like Howard Stern Interviews
on E.
Yeah, so I guess they had, which is interesting. I haven't not really heard of that before, but that's smart. I'm surprised they didn't do more of that, or it wasn't longer running. I don't know how many. I'll have to look into how many episodes there were. But anyways, this is Howard interviewing Richard, and again, Richard's mania, his energy does come off, I think, in this interview and many others at that time.
You started to date. You said you're afraid of dating. And you started to date women. Mm-hmm. And you started to date very good-looking women. Because you yourself are not a great-looking guy.
Whoever thought I was?
Yeah, but yet you started to get girls of model caliber.
You know, I think that you are a closet homosexual and that you want me.
Why would I be a closet homosexual?
Because you are preoccupied.
I'm a married man and I have 3 children.
Big deal. There's a million couples in Hollywood
by the way you handle your celebrity.
I just think that you're preoccupied with my looks. That's all you ever talk about.
I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a break here.
These things are going to break.
I'm going to take a break here, and I'm going to have a serious discussion with you during the commercial. And if you want to allow me to interview you, then we will continue this interview. If not, I will throw you off the couch and interview you without you being here.
So, first of all, Richard, very prescient there. A lot of people say that now, based on a lot of the questions that Howard asks and his, certain obsessions with things. They think maybe he's been in the closet this whole time, but Richard called it 30 years ago.
I mean, you could just tell by the way he looks. It's weird. This whole thing is weird. I don't like it.
But the reason I found this interview interesting is because you hear Howard kind of reprimanding him there, but it is the whole time Richard is like manic. He's bouncing off the walls. And I think this is probably right before he got sober. I think this is 93. And I think he got sober in 94, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And he is like all over the place. And you would, even in those, I watched some of the old like Letterman interviews, and Letterman kind of has to like reel him in. Like he's so energetic, which again, knowing him later in life, and he's also an older man, so that probably plays a part into it, and sober. But you don't think of him that way. But he was bouncing off the fucking walls in these interviews. And he said he got pissed at Letterman once, because they were giving him the pre-interview. For anyone that doesn't know, on all these late night shows, a producer will basically call you and be like, all right, so what stories do you want Dave to ask you about? And that's why they're always like, so I hear you were, I mean, my favorite one that I quote all the time is John Lovitz was on with Byron Allen. Byron Allen's the best. And Byron Allen says, John, I hear you've been getting older. so they did that with Richard Lewis, and he's like, well, I don't really do that with Dave. We kind of just go. Like, I don't really want to do that. And they kind of kind of forced him into it, or he felt like he had to. And he's like, all right, if that's what Dave wants. And then, so he had a story about being in Hawaii, and Letterman goes, oh, so this is your Hawaii chunk? And just sandbags him. This is your Hawaii chunk? And Richard was so pissed, he destroyed the fucking dressing room. He was furious.
I mean, I probably would be too. I don't know about.
Yeah. Well, to Letterman's credit, though, I guess the next time they interacted, he apologized. He was like, hey, I shouldn't have done that. You're a comic. You're coming on. My guys had you do that. I shouldn't have.
Oh, why would he? You shouldn't apologize. That's fucking hilarious.
It is hilarious. That's why I was kind of like, Dave. But he was being nice to Richard. But
yeah, because it's funny. He's like, I don't want to do it. We don't ever do this. He's like, no, you got to do it.
Oh, is this your Hawaii chunk?
That's hilarious.
Or just like, what the fuck? But yeah, he was an interesting talk show guest, because he would go into what seemed like a bit and then just talk a million miles an hour. So you're like, I don't know, is it a bit? I have no idea what he's doing. Again, very Robin Williams.
But he's still on with Howard talking about David Brenner.
Yeah, so David Brenner is another guy that was great to him, and he tells a little bit about that.
Evidently, you ran out of money, true? Because you went to David Brenner and you asked him for a loan. David Brenner was a successful comic.
Yeah,
and
when I was broke, I asked him for some money.
Why were you broke? You come from a wealthy family. Do you not?
I don't want to ask for money. You have to be on your own after a while.
You didn't want to ask your parents for money?
No, they sent me to college. I was funny.
And after college, you felt, hey, I can't ask my parents for money. So you asked David Brenner for money? A perfect stranger, you asked David Brenner for money.
What's the perfect stranger? He was a best friend.
How did you ask
David Brenner? Do research.
You went to David Brenner and said, listen, I'm going to get out of the business?
No, I said, I want to be a comic full time. I want to quit these day gigs.
Right.
He said, what do you need? I said, if you gave me $1,000, I think I could probably quit my jobs. And he gave me $1,000.
That is unbelievable.
And back then it was unbelievable.
That's a lot of money.
$1,000 back then. It was like asking for 10 or something.
Because why should he care whether you keep your career or not?
Because you want to know the word? Right. Just read my lips. Friendship.
Right.
It's a hard word to...
I would not lend you $1,000.
And believe me, I wouldn't ask you for a dime.
Absolutely.
By the way, you realize, like, when Howard has, like, Richard Lewis on, or Larry, or Seinfeld, you realize how much, like, Howard is one of those guys. Like, he's a funny, neurotic guy. I feel like he didn't play to that. I mean, at times, of course, he did. But his persona was so, the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
And like, needing everyone's love and everything. And he didn't always play into that kind of neurotic banter. Right. But when he's with guys like that, he is very funny.
Yes.
So yeah, David Brenner, we will do a David Brenner episode at some point, because I feel like a lot of comedians were influenced by him in one way or the other. By the way, this just popped in my head when I was listening to Richard Lewis. I swear this is David Brenner. I could be wrong. So this is good. This will help the algorithm. Let me know in the YouTube comments if I have this person right. I believe it's David Brenner that Norm Macdonald mentions him and says he's looking down from heaven, or probably looking up, being raped by the devil. I mean, that dude had some sins, man.
Didn't he say that to Larry King?
I think he was talking about David Brenner, but I could be wrong. It could be someone else. So let me know in the comments if I have that one right.
He's the best.
I know that's not an accusation of David Brenner. I know nothing about the man. I'll look into him more when we do his episode at some point. But that's just a Norm quote that I always love that I think involves David Brenner.
It'd be great if it doesn't. You're like,
I know. I'm just throwing him under the bus.
It just fits in this show very well.
Yes.
Now we're at Anything But Love.
Yeah. So this was like I guess you would say the pinnacle of Richard's early career. This is the closest he found to an avenue of success outside of stand-up, where he's in this show with Jamie Lee Curtis called Anything But Love. And I'll tell you a little more about it after we hear from Richard.
And they laugh. I doubt Jamie Lee Curtis would have commuted to Rome.
What? That was a big break for me.
Oh my God, of course it was.
I used to sit at home and watch like Roseanne because it was on before.
Right.
And I said, God, 40 million people just saw my promo. That's what it is.
Exactly. That was on for a few years.
4 years. We got screwed out of a fifth. We got picked up.
So you just missed syndication.
Yeah, and we got picked up for another 22, and the head of Fox told ABC, I don't want to do it anymore. Imagine that?
You're kidding me?
I swear to God, it's a long story.
What is that? Oh my God!
It's a long story, but it was and they didn't tell Jamie and I. We show up for our rehearsal.
No.
And they're breaking down our set for a pilot.
You're kidding me?
I swear to God, it was a nightmare.
What?
Yeah, no,
that's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, it was all over the papers. First time a network never went out and got drunk to the Palm and drank and said, hey, we got 25th year.
Right.
I don't want to get into why, but it was a joke.
But
unfortunately, I wish he told Artie there because all I could find is that it was canceled basically for low rating or not good enough ratings. So I'm curious. There were they both had. I found interviews with both Jamie Lee Curtis and Richard Lewis. Jamie Lee, that's a big deal. I don't think she was fully Jamie Lee Curtis at that time, but like that's a big get for television at that time. I feel like
definitely.
But yeah, it was on 4 seasons, but it only had 56 episodes. So saying it was just shy of syndication isn't quite true because usually the standard for that is 100 episodes.
Right. Or in the ballpark.
Yeah. But I mean, it was on for 4 seasons and it is crazy back then that it's like, wow, 40 million people were watching Roseanne. If, 3/4 tune out, you still have 10 million people,
right.
Like that many could accidentally leave their TVs on and see Richard Lewis.
Your rating should accidentally be pretty damn good.
Well, for now, for this time, they'd be tremendous.
It'd be the biggest show on television.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying is there were rumors of them having like problems, but in every interview, Richard Lewis would just say, no, I love Jamie Lee Curtis. He said he loved her husband, Christopher Guest. He did tell one story that she brought her young daughter to set one day and they had a makeout scene. And he's like, well, this is pretty weird. He felt uncomfortable with that. But I couldn't find anything specific if they it was just tabloid rumors. It seemed like that they had some sort of beef. But I think they were basically, obviously, romantic interests, Richard Lewis and Jamie Lee Curtis. And for you kids out there, by the way, Google Jamie Lee Curtis is topless in a movie.
Oh, so nice.
Give that a Google. That's our little bonus for you kids at home today. I highly recommend.
It's research purposes, so if anyone's asking.
Yeah. It's in honor of Richard Lewis, so don't feel guilty.
Shout out Richard Lewis.
Yeah, so Anything But Love, 56 episodes, certainly not a not a staple, not something you're going to hear in the history of television necessarily, but like I said, a lot of people were watching that at the time. So yeah, Richard Lewis had a lot of eyeballs on him. He also tried a show years later, I think around 93, 94, around when he got sober, called Daddy Dearest. And that was starring him and Don Rickles. Again, a great pairing. This guy draws great with his co-stars.
friends. Yeah.
So Don Rickles was playing Richard Lewis's father. And the premise seemed good to me. Like the idea. So the basic premise was, Richard Lewis, Don Rickles gets divorced from Richard Lewis's mother and has to move in with Richard. So it's basically just them roasting each other for half an hour. Essentially seems like the perfect role for Don Rickles. I don't know how the execution was. I saw some of it. There's episodes on YouTube. It didn't wow me, but it's also, a 1993 sitcom. So maybe it shouldn't necessarily.
Whoa.
But I do think with stuff like that, I feel like the name might have really fucked them.
Yeah.
Dear Daddy Dearest, you don't think it's a hilarious comedy with Don Rickles and Richard Lewis?
No.
I wouldn't anyways. So I feel like sometimes the name just fucks you where you're like, I don't know what the hell that Daddy Dearest. I'm not watching that.
That sounds like a show about a daughter-father relationship.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that one was only on 11 episodes. So Again, it seems like a surefire success, but no luck there.
No. Next we got him talking about losing money.
Oh yeah, so this was sad. I had never heard before, but this kind of goes hand in hand with his addiction and what he was dealing with that time when he was kind of at the peak of his success.
Well, that was back. I wasn't sober then, but I only had.
How'd you do this drunk?
I didn't do it drunk.
Oh, okay.
That's not fair to say. I wasn't stumbling around like Bluebeard the pirate. I mean, I did 60 Lettermans. I had one too many wines on occasion, but that was like Super Bowl for me.
I apologize.
Anything but love. 4.5 years. I was sober when we shot, and 10 years of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and now I'm doing a show. Well, I'm sober now, but I was sober during Curb. But no. When I was off, my life was unmanageable. But I took my work seriously. But to be truthful, in one of the peaks of my career, I was so out of control with drugs that I stopped stand-up for 3 years, and I lost a tremendous amount of income because it was at a peak of my career at that point, and I was a sucker for people calling me up because they would say, I'm going to be homeless if you don't give me 10 grand, blah, blah, blah. I gave away hundreds of thousands of dollars when I could piss away that kind of huge amount of money, but when you give away money like that, it's kiss it goodbye,
Yeah, so that was sad to hear, especially for a guy that, like I said, his income was stand-up. Like, that's how he made his money. He was constantly working in stand-up and everything. So to take 3 years off, that's pretty tough. And it's a shame that that we talked about with Red Fox, where a lot of these guys, when they have success, they want to be generous with it. And that just opens them up to being, taken advantage of. So unfortunate to hear that, but it seems like everything's okay with Richard now. I saw he did like a tour of his house and things. Seems like the guy's living all right. So I won't cry too much for Richard.
He's probably doing quite well.
But again, he toured all the way. I think in that Kimmel appearance we played, that was like 2017, 2018, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And he's promoting dates on there. So yeah, Richard Lewis will be in Vegas and fucking he's still out touring. So well, not anymore, but as of 5 years ago, I'd say. He was working all the way through. And I think in that where he announces he has Parkinson's, I believe he said that he shot this latest season of Curb that isn't out yet. So I think he is in it.
Oh, so they'll probably make fun of his Parkinson's.
I don't know. No, because when they had shot it, I don't think he'd announced it yet. So
also, all the hilarious Parkinson's jokes were in the Michael J. Fox episode.
I know. You can't do it twice. Tough to duplicate.
Like when he gives Larry, soda? Yeah, when he gives him the soda and it explodes was the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life.
Was that Parkinson's? Also, yes, for those of you wondering, that was the disgraced Pat O'Brien that was interviewing him there, who was essentially canceled for leaving naughty voicemails. So I think he liked to be pissed on or something. I don't know. Who knew this would be such a sexy episode talking about Richard Lewis?
Yeah. Next, this is our last clip that YouTube will probably allow us to show.
Okay.
So noted. But I'm in pain.
Oh yeah. So this was his special, his first special. And, Artie Lang's a guy I respect. And, maybe you could say Artie goes over the top with this compliment, but Artie's never been a guy to bullshit you. I've heard him with, respected people on Howard or on his own show where Artie will have no problem busting the guy's balls. So I feel like this does mean something coming from him.
Special. Your first stand-up special, I feel,
I'm in pain,
is the best stand-up special of all time.
Wow.
I honestly, and my hand to God, I'm not saying that because you're here. When I'm at the comedy clubs talking to comedians, we talk about it all the time. I think it's better than that Richard Pryor live in concert. I think it's better, and that's as great as it gets. That's the reason I became a comedian.
Well, what can I tell you?
I mean, that is. I
said that very same thing at a party last night.
You were just saying that?
No. It was my, because I had paid my dues and I had like 8 years of stuff pouring out of me.
Right, so, and it was just all brilliant, just like perfect.
Well, no, I got good. It got me going. Yeah. That and Letterman. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had never heard that sort of. I've heard that like Richard Lewis is an underrated stand-up and was very big at that time, things like that. I don't know that I'd heard anyone say this was my favorite special of all time. So that really stuck out to me when Artie said that.
Yeah, he doesn't say that very often or about like anything.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, coming from someone else, I'd be like, he's just kissing his ass. But Artie doesn't strike me as that type of guy. So I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I will say, like, to me, so I watched it. You can go watch it. It's on YouTube in full. And I was going to pull clips from it. For me, I didn't love Richard's stand-up necessarily. Again, seeing so much of his personality in Curb, I didn't feel it was a great representation. I feel like he comes off better. It feels like more of an act on stage, which obviously it is. But it felt to me like a lesser, like Gary Shandling or something like that. And again, I hate judging stuff from 40 years ago because it was never supposed to be judged 40 years from then. But for me, I didn't love it. I'll be curious to hear what you guys think in the comments if I'm underrating Richard Lewis. But a lot of it felt very of the time. Like guys like Paul Reiser and Gary Shandling were doing stuff that was comparable. And I think I like Gary Shandling stuff more than I've seen. So, but what I do love Richard Lewis in is a thing that YouTube probably won't let us play. So before you leave us, subscribe and then go to the Patreon where we can show all these videos. If you want to see these videos in full, blindmike.net, check out the Patreon. But I felt like we had to end with some of my favorite clips from Curb. Now, a lot of these also obviously highlight Larry David. I think Larry David has the best lines in them. But I was trying to think, it's tough to rank. Because I love Funkhauser. I think the Larry Ted Danson dynamic is very funny. I think Leon was a great character. But the Richard Lewis, Larry David relationship is like so perfect to me. And it represents, I think, so many friendships that just guys have. Where literally I moved in with my buddy Brian when I moved out here. The first place I lived in Eastern Mass, and we were roommates together. And he said, because we would constantly we would be at odds, we would bicker and things like that. And he said this would be like Larry David and Richard Lewis moving in together. And by the time we moved out, we weren't speaking to each other. And now we're friends again. But it's like, I think it is representative of so many friendships, the Richard Lewis, Larry David relationship. So these are some of the clips that I just love from that.
Oh, God, I hate doing this because, you always take it the wrong way. You've taken everything the wrong way ever since I've known you. 7 years ago, I was in Paris, and I remember...
By the way, I want to put this scene in perspective. That was apropos of nothing. Richard just presents that he wants to ask him something, and then is like, I hate doing this with you. It's like, already, they haven't even started talking yet.
All right, you stole my outgoing message on my answering machine.
What are you, crazy?
How long? I mean, this is... What
are you, nuts?
I know you're ethical. I'm ethical. We don't, when people steal jokes, we fucking hate that. But I hate when people fucking steal my outgoing messages. I remember calling you.
You don't even know what you're talking about. You
have my same answering machine outgoing message, and
that's my message. I didn't get that message.
Paris.
You wrote it in Paris. I had that message 7 years ago.
Bullshit.
7 years ago.
You know what? I wrote it 7.5 years ago.
Whose memory are you going to trust, okay? An ex-alcoholic or a person who was lucid 24 hours a day his whole life.
Do me a favor.
What?
Please change it.
What?
Because it's really bothering.
It's not.
I want you to change that because people call me and they call you and they go, oh, Larry David has the same thing. It's not fucking Larry David's. It's mine. I mean, I don't have a wife. I don't have, my parents are dead. You have a family. Come on, change. Can't you? Come on.
Oh, he doesn't have a wife and his parents are dead.
That's right. I hold on to these things.
Maybe wife and his parents are dead. Oh.
Do me a favor and change it for me.
Yeah, I'll change it because you don't have a wife and your parents. You lost your parents.
I'm laughing. You know why? Because you're funny.
And they would have been 95, but they're dead.
I'm laughing, but if you don't change it.
It's a shame.
All right, you done?
Yeah, I'm done. I didn't steal your message, asshole. I didn't take it. You took it from me. But you know what? I'll be the man. I'll be the man.
That's one of my favorite just like mocking interactions from Larry with, oh, your parents are dead. Oh, he doesn't have a wife and his parents are dead. I think about that all the fucking time. I love that so much. And it is, again, it's a thing like that only, it's very representative of male relationships where it's only like a true friend that you can openly be like, oh, your parents are dead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing, you saw a little bit of it there. And I think you see it in one of our other clips. But there's certain guys that when they were on the show would get Larry to break. And I love that they didn't cut it out because I feel it is because Curb is, mostly improv and everything. I do think it's, I like that they leave it in because I think it's how people speak.
Right.
Where like they're arguing there, but Richard made him laugh a little bit. Like when he's mocking him and Richard just goes, can you do me a favor? Like sees it, you can tell how serious he is. And Larry starts breaking a little bit. Like that is how people talk, where it's like, yeah, I'm arguing with you, but you're making me laugh still.
Yeah. And
it was like Seinfeld could do that with him. Richard Lewis. I'm trying to think. There weren't a lot of guys where Larry would break like that, but Richard was definitely
Richard did the same thing. He's like, he even pointed it out. He's like, I'm laughing, but like,
yeah, they're enjoying each other.
Should we go to the next one here?
Yeah. What's this one?
None of them are labeled. It's just fun.
Oh, okay. All right.
Good fun stuff.
Larry, will you fix this, please?
I don't know how to do this. Hey, I tried every remote, and none of them worked. Look.
So fucking idiotic. You should have one goddamn remote.
I know we should.
You should have one remote. You need to call him, Larry. Are you going to call him?
Well, maybe we should play Scrabble. Nothing we can do.
It's a bad joke, right?
Yeah, it is a joke. I mean, I don't...
Scrabble?
It's a joke. What are we supposed to do? You want to sit shiver?
Why don't we just play Twister? Would you be happy? If this was your show, then you would make every fucking plan to
go
watch.
upstairs and we'll get under the covers and sob.
Why don't we just go to my house and watch it, for Christ's sake? What's wrong with that?
I'll go to your house.
Jesus Christ. I knew you fucked it up.
I fucked it up. What are you looking at stupid things that to say? I fucked it up.
You fucked it up. You don't know how to use a goddamn cell phone. Praying mantis can use that goddamn phone.
Cracked him again.
So if you haven't seen that episode of Curb, this is while Richard's girlfriend is like falling ill. She's not well. And they're just arguing about the fucking clicker because Richard wants to watch his the debut of his special. But
of course you fucked up.
That's another one that I quote all the time. You can probably find where I've tweeted it multiple times. Right, let's all get under the covers and sob. It's a great, well, then let's just give up then. What do you want from me?
It's very funny.
Well, then let's go. I like that the description, well, then let's go upstairs and get under the covers and sob. All right, we got one more Curb clip, right?
Yeah, this is our last one here.
Hey guys, I'm sorry. Hey man, good to see you. Long time.
By the way, this is from the Bear Midriff, which is one of my favorite episodes.
Oh yeah, and this is this is just a great, this is how people feel so often, and which is what Curb is.
Yeah,
it's like how people feel inside all the time.
Yes,
and it's just never acted out like this.
Just see, what do you like to do? I don't know what you do.
Yeah.
We ordered. We couldn't wait.
I can see, but I want to eat something. I'm famished, so I'm starved.
Oh, move over.
I'm starved.
You should. What? No, you should.
What's going on? Can I sit down?
Come on, scooch over.
How many years you know this guy? You're close friends.
Right. I know him longer, so we should sit over there because I'm actually going to be talking to him more than you. So I should have eye contact with him as opposed to turning around and straining my neck.
And I'm a lefty. I can't.
Yeah, but it'll be on your right. It works to your advantage.
Look, the only reason you want me to slide over is because you want the luxury suite.
Of course I want the luxury suite. You want the luxury suite too?
Yes, I do. You're right.
Yeah,
all right, I do.
Yeah.
But you...
Hey. Oh my God.
Where'd he go?
What the hell?
I'm getting angry at you.
And that, in these clips, Richard is so perfect because, again, I don't think he's acting. That's just his relationship with Larry, where he has no problem just being like, "Fuck you! What are you doing to me?"
I think that season of Curb was the funniest Seinfeld's ever been.
You mean Jerry Seinfeld?
Yeah.
And I was thinking like the show Seinfeld.
No. It's just Jerry as a whole.
Jerry is great on Curb, and this is again where I know we did the episode. Is Jerry Seinfeld funny? But I was strictly talking about his stand-up because when you see him in moments like that, he's very funny. He's great in Curb.
Just the way he like half mouths for him to move just kills me. He's like, you move.
And that's another like when they're trying to fire the woman with the bare midriff. The argument that they have where he's trying to compliment Larry by saying what an asshole he is to get him to do it is brilliant. This felt like was this a short one? This flew by.
But just in about an hour.
Oh, all right. Well, it felt very fast. So I hope I did right by Richard Lewis. I know there was a lot of Curb talk, but I do feel like that is a big part of both his career and his personality.
If anyone says they know him from his stand-up over Curb, they're just being a hipster.
A little bit, yeah. Well, no, but here's the thing, though, and this is mainly what I wanted to say about Richard Lewis. I think if you're from that time, much like Kirk said with Dennis Miller, I bet there weren't necessarily a lot of kids at that time that were like, oh, Dennis Miller is my favorite comedian. But there were some.
Yep.
And there were some kids that were like, oh my God, Richard Lewis is my favorite comedian. You know what I mean? And now
Artie Lang.
You have people with podcasting and social media, you have people that build up an audience. So like you might not know the name, Colin Terrell or Jordan Jensen, who I think is very funny. Like they're very young and it's very early in their careers, but they're able to, sell out some shows because they were able to build an audience through podcast appearances, learning their own personalities from their own podcasts and just seeing them on social media. So like, even when you're early in your career, if you're talented, you have much more of a way to find that audience that guys like Richard Lewis, Dennis Miller, Gary Shandling, these people didn't have unless they were on television. So that's one good thing about the internet.
Random internet dub. Finally found one.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Richard Lewis, I hope I did you justice because he's one of the greatest Curb characters ever and just a very funny guy. And if you like this episode and you want to support the show, then make sure you go to blindmike.net. You can find all our links there for Why You Laughing, the Blind Mike Project, Who Are These Socials, Thursdays at 6 with Carl, my pal. So make sure you check that out if you want to support the show for free. Subscribe on YouTube. And if you decide, hey, I like what these guys are doing, then make sure you join the Patreon because you get bonus episodes. You get these episodes a week early, as well as the other zany stuff that we do. And go to verygoodshow.org if you want to check out Craig. If you're a fan of shock jockery, it sounds like they're diving into the world of conspiracies.
Every once in a while, we dip our toe in, see where it goes.
These guys are edgelords. So if you like the sound of that, go to verygoodshow.org and check out Craig. If you like the free podcast, then support his Patreon.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we will talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?